Hey guys, tonight we follow a figure who drifted like smoke through borders, interrogations, and underworld myths. Picture this. Tbilisi, winter of 1949. Snow settles soft like powdered sugar over rusted balconies and cracked sidewalks. A boy no older than 5 shuffles through a narrow alley, the wind biting at his cheeks, his small hands shoved into a threadbare coat. The buildings around him wear stories on their peeling walls, secrets whispered from cellars, betrayals frozen in time. You probably won't survive this world, not with both your conscience and kneecaps intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The boy's name is Vyacheslav Ivankov, but they'll call him Yaponchik one day. Not for his looks, though he carries an angular face, eyes like narrowed razors, but because of a crooked smirk that reminded old-timers of a Japanese ghost from an urban legend. He's Georgian-born to Russian parents, and from the moment he learns to walk, he learns something else too. How to disappear just before trouble begins. His father's not much in the picture. Some say he was a tailor who stitched more lies than suits. His mother, strict, sharp, and survival-focused, tells him the world doesn't owe him anything. She works 3 jobs and still finds time to beat the dust out of their only rug and the foolishness out of him. Not violently, more like life training. By the time he's 10, Vyacheslav knows which neighbors will lend bread and which will report you for stealing it. He can tell which police officers are broke enough to bribe and which will beat you because their wives screamed at them over burnt soup. In Soviet Georgia, these distinctions matter more than spelling your name correctly. He's not a schoolboy so much as a street student. The older boys on the block run errands for petty gangsters, and soon enough, so does he. First, it's delivering a package wrapped in greasy newspaper. Then it's collecting debts. Then it's learning that asking too many questions gets you black eyes and blacklisted. One day, he helps distract a shopkeeper while a friend nicks a box of cigarettes. They get away clean, or so they think. That night, 2 men in gray coats knock at his mother's door. Vyacheslav gets cuffed and thrown into a juvenile detention center for organized theft. He's 12. Inside, he doesn't cry. Crying is currency you lose quickly. Instead, he learns fast. How to spot hierarchy, how to nod just enough to avoid confrontation, and how to fight just dirty enough to win without leaving marks that scream guilt. The guards are brutal, but indifferent. They teach nothing but punishment. The older boys, though, some of them vor v zakone, thieves in law, are philosophers of a cruel sort. They teach him that in prison, power is whispered, never declared. If you have to say you're in charge, you're not. If someone calls you boss, check your back. It's here that the ghost of Yaponchik begins to take form. He doesn't yet wear the tattoos of the Brotherhood, but the ideas are starting to ink his brain. Loyalty to the code, rejection of state authority, brotherhood above bloodlines. Never marry, never serve, never plead. Meanwhile, outside, Georgia groans under Soviet pressure. Bread lines grow longer. Corruption seeps from government offices to butcher counters. The newspapers still talk of great 5-year plans and agricultural miracles. But on the streets, people are trading ration coupons like poker chips and making side deals over pickled herring. By age 16, Vyacheslav has cycled through 3 different detention centers. Each one adds a layer to his understanding. In one, he learns that bribing a kitchen worker gets you extra soup. In another, he sees a boy beaten nearly to death for ratting out a card game. In the third, he meets a man with inked stars on his shoulders and stories of smuggling diamonds inside piano legs. And then comes Butyrka, Moscow's infamous prison, ancient and echoing with screams from decades past. It's overcrowded, unsanitary, and freezing. But for Vyacheslav, it's something else too, a kind of academy. Here, the real thieves-in-law are housed, men who've killed with their hands and yet talk like poets, who debate Lenin and Dostoevsky between extortion calls. They spot something in him, his quiet, his way of listening more than talking, his refusal to bow or puff his chest. One inmate gifts him a worn paperback of Dostoevsky's The Gambler, and he reads it twice in silence, not for the story, but the rhythm. The way desperation wears a suit and combs its hair, many people still think that Ivankov's rise began later, after his release. But the smarter ones say it began right here, among lice-ridden blankets and dripping pipes. So what do you think? Does greatness start in motion or in stillness? One snowy night, he's called to mop the hallway. A guard watches him closely. As he drags the filthy cloth over stone, another inmate walks by and mutters just 3 words in Georgian slang. He's already won. It means he's already chosen, already marked, already made. That night, Vyacheslav sleeps with one eye open and a grin just beginning to form. Butyrka isn't just a prison. It's a layered labyrinth of rituals, codes, and myth. Once the Tsar's fortress, now the Soviet Union's breeding ground for future generals of the underground. Vyacheslav Ivankov walks its corridors not like a prisoner, but like someone mapping out the fault lines of an empire that pretends to be whole. He's 17 now, still young, but something in his eyes makes men twice his age pause. The guards have a word for boys like him. Teneka, a shadowed thing. Not because he's violent. In fact, he rarely lifts a hand. But when he does, it's fast, surgical, almost polite. He doesn't speak unless necessary. His reputation grows not by stories he tells, but by stories others whisper. He starts spending more time with older inmates, specifically the Vorovskoy Krug, or thief circle. These aren't thugs. These are judges of an invisible court, rulers of a nation that doesn't appear on any map. They teach him the thief's code, the Upshchak rules. Never serve in the army, never work for the state, never start a family, own nothing except power. Tattooing is part of the ritual. His first ink is crude but meaningful. A cat sitting upright with its tail curled. A mark of the pickpocket, the prowler. Over time, more symbols will come. Stars on the shoulders for rank, barbed wire across the chest for time served, eyes on the stomach to say he sees everything. He never rushes it. Tattoos aren't decoration. They're autobiography. There's a man in his block named Artyom, once a big-time smuggler from Odessa. Artyom takes a liking to Vyacheslav, partly out of curiosity. He calls him Yaponchik. The first time, after watching the boy fold his socks with such precision, it reminded him of a Japanese soldier he once bribed in Vladivostok. The name sticks. Yaponchik, little Japanese. A name half mocking, half respectful. But over time, the mocking half disappears. They play chess every other evening. Not the casual kind. This is war in 64 squares. Artyom tries to provoke him with commentary, jokes, distractions. Yaponchik stays silent, making patient moves, his eyes flicking only once, to the ceiling when Artyom loses his rook. He always wins. not with flashy moves, but with creeping inevitability. And it's not just chess. The way he organizes a shared stash of food, making sure the weakest get a little more. The way he convinces a volatile killer to stand down after a razor blade argument. He doesn't shout. He doesn't threaten. He just speaks in a calm, almost amused tone. A joke slipped in at the right second. A pause timed just so. Eventually, Artyom stops calling him boy. Meanwhile, the world outside shifts like sand under a boot. It's the late 1960s. Brezhnev rules. The KGB tightens its grip, but corruption blooms beneath every regulation. Factories report imaginary numbers. Inspectors sell silence. And prisons, especially ones like Butyrka, operate as barter economies more than correctional facilities. Yaponchik starts brokering deals between blocks. Need penicillin? Talk to him. Want a knife made from a toothbrush and a stolen lighter spring? He knows a guy. A guard's daughter needs braces. Maybe there's a dentist in cell 6 with some favors owed. Everything's fluid. Everything's negotiable. There's one incident that turns the tide. A man named Rustam, newly arrived, big, full of swagger, starts disrespecting the code. He smuggles in cigarettes and sells them at triple price, beats a fellow inmate for eyeing his bread. The block watches, so does Yaponchik. Then one evening during shower hour, Rustam slips and hits the tile hard. 2 days later, he's gone. Transferred, they say. But no one sees him leave. No screams, no blood, just a quiet hallway and a cold tile that still smells of antiseptic. No one accuses Yaponchik, but the silence around him grows denser after that. Many people still think that he ordered it, that it was a test to see if the code would protect him. So what do you think? Was it justice or rehearsal? In that same month, he receives a message scrawled on torn cardboard. Approved. Nothing else. It's left under his bunk. No signature. He knows what it means. The Brotherhood has accepted him. Officially now, he's a Vior, a thief in law. He earns his second tattoo, stars etched across both shoulders. Painful, yes, but more than that, binding. From this moment, he's no longer a person. He's a symbol, a keeper of tradition older than Lenin, stricter than any court. Yaponchik begins mentoring others, quietly, always. He teaches that true power doesn't rush, that violence is a last resort, not a style. He corrects posture, attitude, even speech, makes men more dangerous by making them less obvious. He writes poetry. Yes, poetry. Not the grand kind. Small verses about cigarettes shared in the rain, the sound of boots and morning roll call, the way hope flickers when a guard hums a lullaby in the dark. One night, a new arrival mocks his small size and calm tone, calls him half a thief. Yaponchik doesn't respond. Next morning, the man's tray of food is mysteriously missing, and so is the man's protection. He's left alone, and by nightfall, is begging for a cell transfer. Yaponchik says nothing, only blinks slowly and turns a page in The Master and Margarita. He's now a recognized figure in Butyrka, not the boss. There are no bosses in the thief world, but definitely something like a center of gravity. Still, beneath all this, he's watching the cracks, in the code, in the walls, in himself, because sometimes he wonders if maybe the outside world has changed too much, that maybe loyalty to the old ways is becoming a liability. He keeps that doubt tucked deep, but it's there, waiting, whispering. The code of the thief-in-law is carved deep into Yaponchik now, deeper than any tattoo. It lives in how he breathes, how he pauses before speaking, how he watches a man's hands instead of his eyes. But like all sacred things, the code comes with weight, and not everyone carries it the same way. By the early 1970s, Vyacheslav Ivankov has served enough time in the Soviet penal system to know most of its rhythms by heart. He knows when the guards switch shifts by the sound of keys on tile. He can estimate the hour based on the echo of boots in the lower corridor. He hears things others don't, like who gets an extra slice of black bread and who pays for it later with bruises. But most importantly, he's watching the culture shift around him. Young inmates arrive no longer reverent, no longer humble. Some flaunt flashy tattoos they haven't earned. Some talk about going straight after release. A few even speak openly about marriage or deals with officials. Heresy. Yaponchik doesn't react. Not immediately. He lets the culture rot a little before he prunes it. There's a story the older inmates still tell about the time he sat quietly in the corner of a cell while 3 newcomers mocked the code, calling it dusty poetry for men without futures. He waited until the second week. Then, without raising his voice, he asked each of them one question. "What do you owe?" Just that. The next day, 2 of the 3 shaved their heads in silence. The third requested a transfer. No threats, just a reminder that loyalty has memory, and memory has teeth. Still, even Yaponchik can't ignore the shifting tides forever. Outside, the Soviet state is in strange flux. Brezhnev's rule grinds on, gray and slow. Factories sputter, soldiers march without music. But beneath the dull surface, a black market economy thrives. Rubles exchanged for Western jeans, caviar sold for color TVs, forged documents as common as matches. He hears whispers of what's happening outside, from guards, from lawyers, from the occasional slip of a tongue during visitation. The criminal underworld isn't just surviving, it's adapting, and that makes it dangerous. His release, when it comes, is almost casual. He's been inside so long. His exit paperwork looks like a formality. A guard hands him a bag with a pair of cheap shoes, a worn coat, and a file that refers to him as a moderate-risk repeat offender with organized influence tendencies. That's one way to say it. He steps out into the Moscow dusk like a ghost returning from exile. His feet crunch over grit. The air smells like coal and cabbage. Nobody meets him at the gate. He didn't want anyone to. He's 33 years old. Freedom feels thin at first, like clothes that don't quite fit. The city has changed while he was inside. The cars are newer, the slang is faster, the police are lazier but better dressed. Some of the old crew are dead, others are gone, either reformed, retired, or reabsorbed into the underworld like rain into cracked pavement. He moves quietly at first, rents a basement room from a widow who thinks he's an electrician. He eats at the same canteen every morning, orders the same thing: boiled eggs, black bread, and weak tea. He doesn't speak unless someone speaks to him first, but then he starts to reassemble. Not a gang, that's too crude, more like a network. Former inmates, cousins of cousins, quiet bartenders, a chess club that doesn't talk much about chess. Everyone owes someone something, and Yaponchik is the thread that ties them all together. He still lives by the code, but he's clever about its application. He refuses to own property, but uses intermediaries to buy buildings. He won't carry weapons, but the men around him seem to have suspiciously well-tailored jackets. He doesn't take bribes. He accepts gifts of gratitude. One of the first real operations he sets up is an underground boxing ring. Officially, it's a training facility. Realistically, It's a gambling den, debt-settling arena, and negotiation chamber all rolled into one. The matches are brutal, not staged, but curated. Winners earn favor. Losers sometimes vanish. He never fights, of course. But he watches every match, sitting in the shadows with a warm beer and an unread newspaper in his lap. The fighters glance at him between rounds. They don't know what they want more, his approval or his indifference. One night, a local officer named Lev Petrov visits the gym, pretending to be curious about fitness. Yaponchik greets him like an old friend, offers him tea, and spends 20 minutes talking about knee injuries. Petrov leaves with a subtle envelope and the distinct feeling he just agreed to something without realizing it. That's how it starts. Not with gunfire, but with tea. Many people still think that Ivankov ruled by fear, but the truth is quieter. He ruled by etiquette. So what do you think? Is charm more dangerous when it's sincere? The code never leaves him. But now, he learns how to bend it without breaking it. He funds orphanages, but never signs his name. He smuggles weapons, but only for self-protection. He breaks bread with rival thieves, but never toasts with vodka. Only water. His legend grows quietly, not through headlines, but through the stories guards tell each other during long shifts. The ones that start with, "You know who walked into the market today?" and end with a hush. He's back, and this time the world is bending toward him. The gulag teaches lessons the outside world forgets, but Yaponchik remembers them all. And now that he's free, he's putting those lessons to use, not with fists, but with favors. He's no longer just a former inmate. He's becoming something rarer. A man who can move a crowd with a glance or shift power with a phone call he never places. His new base of operations is modest by most standards. A converted warehouse tucked behind a row of gray apartment blocks in Moscow's eastern district. No sign, no doorbell, just a flickering blue light over the entrance and a set of steps that always seem damp. Inside, there's a gym, a sauna, and a small back room lined with bookshelves that hold fewer books than ledgers. That room is where deals are made. Quiet ones. By 1981, he has a full crew working beneath him. They don't call themselves a gang. That word belongs to amateurs. They are a structure, an informal board, a social architecture. If someone needs protection, they talk to Boris. If someone needs to disappear, they talk to Petya. If someone needs cash moved from Baku to Leningrad overnight, they talk to no one. It just happens. Yaponchik doesn't micromanage. He delegates. But when he speaks, people listen, partly because his voice is so rarely heard in public that every syllable seems intentional. And when he does raise his voice, it's like hearing a monk curse. The room always goes still. One of his greatest strengths lies in neutrality. He refuses to feud with rivals. If a dispute arises between two mid-level players, he invites them both to his table. Tea is poured, biscuits are offered, the matter is resolved, usually with no raised hands, just a shifting of boundaries. And if someone refuses peace, that's rare. Because those who leave angry rarely leave in the same car they arrived in. The gulag had taught him chess. Now, he's playing it in real time. Moves are made across cities, not squares. Pieces are people, each with backstories, debts, habits. His memory is frightening. He remembers birthdays, allergies, which son went to medical school, and which one got caught stealing tires. But power invites problems. There's a man named Vadim Morozov, a flashy operator in the North District who deals in weapons and woman trafficking. He's new money, loud and careless. Vadim refuses to pay his dues to the Obshchak, the communal criminal fund all Vori respect. He brags at nightclubs, throws money in the air, and calls men like Yaponchik museums. One night, Vadim hosts a party. Expensive vodka, hired singers, imported cigars. At midnight, someone gifts him a beautiful chessboard hand-carved from Siberian pine. Inside the box is a single piece, a black king. That's all. No note. The next morning, Vadim wires a large donation to the Obshchak and closes 2 of his businesses. He leaves Moscow 3 days later. No one sees him again. It's never traced to Yaponchik, of course, but people remember the chessboard. Meanwhile, Moscow is swelling. Not just in population, but in contradictions. The Soviet state is still preaching equality, but Mercedes are appearing outside government offices. Luxury watches glint on wrists that used to wear ration coupons. Black markets are so normalized they almost have business hours. Yaponchik thrives here. His people operate in construction, pharmaceuticals, even high-end art theft. One of his most lucrative plays? Airport logistics. There's an old friend named Misha, the suitcase, Antonov, who works night shifts at Sheremetyevo International Airport. Misha arranges cargo manifests, customs records, and most importantly, blind spots. With his help, Yaponchik's group begins to move items in and out of the country undetected. The most infamous job? An entire crate labeled as machine parts that, when opened in Berlin, contained 400 bottles of French cognac and 3 stolen Fabergé eggs. Legend says the eggs were hidden inside hollowed-out soap dispensers. Many people still think that job was orchestrated by multiple groups across Europe, but some insiders say it was just Yaponchik and a phone call. So, what do you think? Could one man really pull off a heist in 3 time zones with no fingerprints? Despite his growing influence, he keeps his circle tight. Trust is currency, and he only spends it once per person. New recruits are vetted over months, sometimes years. He watches how they act when no one's looking, whether they tip waiters, whether they lie about small things. He rarely shows emotion, but there's a moment, just one, when someone overhears him laugh. It's over a news article describing Soviet officials cracking down on corruption by monitoring sandwich rations. The absurdity tickles him. He murmurs, "They monitor sandwiches, and we monitor silence." Still, not everything is smooth. The KGB has started noticing him. Not with sirens, but with silence. A car parked outside his flat 2 nights a week. A man pretending to buy oranges who appears on 3 different blocks. Files start piling up. Coded reports, black and white photos, theories. But Yaponchik knows the art of being almost invisible. He never uses his real name on anything. He moves residences monthly. Even his bank accounts, hidden through a network of shell companies and phantom employees, change like weather patterns. He also has friends in high places, men with titles, men who wear medals and deliver whispers instead of orders. They meet in bathhouses, in Turkish restaurants, in art galleries where nothing is bought and everything is negotiated. One such meeting takes place on a Thursday afternoon in a museum cafe. No names exchanged. Just 2 men eating cold blinis while a third slides an envelope under a napkin. The message: leave Sheremetyevo for a while. Heat's coming. And so he does. He closes shop, liquidates assets, settles scores, and vanishes. Just like that. No goodbye, no farewell toast. One morning, the gym is closed, the warehouse is locked, and the tea in his usual canteen seat grows cold. The whispers begin again. Where did he go? Why did he leave? And what did he take with him? The rumors say he flew out under a false name. Others say he never left at all, just moved 2 districts over and dyed his hair. But those who really know Yaponchik know this. When he disappears, it's deliberate, calculated, surgical. Like a man folding a coat he never intends to wear again. Late 1980s Moscow is a fragile place. Glasnost and perestroika sweep through the city like a cold front, bracing, unfamiliar, and promising things no one quite believes. Factories close, currency fluctuates, black markets become lifelines. Everyone is hustling, even the bureaucrats, especially the bureaucrats. Yaponchik sees what's coming. The state is cracking, and from the cracks, new empires will rise. Some will be loud, some legal, some wrapped in velvet. He doesn't want to be in Moscow when the floor collapses. He wants to be standing just outside, watching, so he vanishes. And when he reappears, he's no longer in the Soviet Union. Word arrives quietly, carried by mouth and memory. He's in Brooklyn now, Brighton Beach, Little Odessa, a slice of old Russia in the New World, where you can buy black bread and bribe a dentist in the same block. Here, exiles and opportunists live elbow to elbow, swapping stories and scams over beer so flat it fizzes in protest. He arrives not as a refugee, but as a ghost in a silk collar. There's no trail, no fanfare, just a new man with old money who doesn't talk much, but always pays in cash. His first months in the U.S. are oddly calm. He rents a small apartment above a bakery, attends synagogue once, quietly, respectfully. Nobody knows whether he's religious or nostalgic. The rabbi nods. Yaponchik nods back. That's all. He starts making friends the old-fashioned way, favors. There's a mechanic who needs help importing his cousin from Moldova. Yaponchik knows a lawyer. A nightclub owner needs protection from a petty extortionist. Yaponchik sends 2 men in suits, silent, polite, unyielding. A grocer's daughter wants to attend college but can't afford the tuition. 1 week later, she finds a plain envelope with a note that simply says, "Believe in your books." Word spreads. They don't call him Yaponchik here, not at first. Here he's Slava or Mr. V. Sometimes just the man. But those from Moscow, those who knew the ring in the rain and the chessboard warnings, they know exactly who he is. And they say nothing, because saying something might mean you matter. And mattering too much near him has consequences. His operations resume, slowly, invisibly. No more boxing rings or smoky back rooms. Now it's antiques, specifically rare watches and vintage jewelry. He opens a small storefront on Brighton's main strip. Ocean timepieces, a tasteful sign, a curtain in the back room, and no paperwork that connects him to it. From this boutique, he builds a quiet empire. He deals in time, ironically. Buys and sells watches worth more than apartments. Some of them are real, some are not. Most customers don't care. What matters is the handshake, the whisper, the nod. But the watches are only a front. What really moves through his hands are debts, leverage, and silence. A man owes $50,000 to the wrong crew. Yaponchik buys the debt, forgives half, and earns loyalty that's worth triple. Another man wants a restaurant but needs a license. Suddenly, a city official's cousin shows up with an interest in Mediterranean food. He doesn't run the Russian-American underworld. He doesn't have to. He's the middle, the place where problems go to vanish and solutions come back dressed in cashmere. By 1990, he's respected, not feared, not exactly. But no one says no to him. Even those who've never met him know the name. A cab driver who once took him to JFK still refuses to clean the seat he sat in, says the leather absorbed silence. The FBI begins to take notice. Agents tail him. They sit across diners with folded newspapers. But Yaponchik moves like fog. There, but impossible to contain. He's careful. Never speaks on the phone. Never visits the same place twice in a week. Changes cars, clothes, habits. Lives like a man allergic to patterns. He also has allies in unexpected places. One is a retired FBI translator who once lived in Kiev. She runs into him at a market, recognizes his dialect, and strikes up a brief chat about Georgian dumplings. 2 weeks later, she's given a private job, translating Russian slang into formal English for a mysterious legal advisory board. The check's clear. The names never match. Another ally is a Miami businessman of Cuban descent. He runs a string of laundromats, but owns no soap. Instead, he launders something else. When Yaponchik visits Florida, always briefly, always unannounced, this man meets him with a smile and a ledger that smells like salt and secrets. Many people still think that Ivankov was a brute with connections. But his real strength wasn't violence. It was navigation. So what do you think? Is a man more dangerous when he knows how to fight, or when he knows he doesn't have to? He builds no skyscrapers, starts no wars, throws no parties. But in back rooms across Brooklyn, grown men lower their voices when they speak his name. Even when he's not in the room, especially when he's not in the room. Under the sodium glow of a Brooklyn night, the ring returns. Not the kind that echoes with fists against flesh, but a different kind of stage. One where men gamble with dignity, pride, and just enough bruising to remind everyone this is still a contact sport. Yaponchik watches from the edge of the room, seated on a cracked leather chair in a warehouse that smells faintly of motor oil, sweat, and resolve. This isn't the Soviet gym he once ran, but the principle remains. Let the fighters punch, let the watchers bet, and let the real deals happen in the hallway behind the flickering exit sign. The underground boxing syndicate he creates in New York is quiet and efficient. Fighters come from Queens, Brighton, Jersey. Some are Russian ex-cons, others are local kids who don't ask too many questions. The rules are clear. No killing, no police, and no breaking the bones you can't afford to fix. But once again, the fists are just the curtain. Behind the scenes, the real commerce happens. Debt reconciliation, border documents, quiet mergers of criminal portfolios. A fight becomes the pretext for a dozen meetings. When a man's tooth hits the mat, a loan gets forgiven in Staten Island. When a ref raises an arm, a nightclub changes hands in Brighton Beach. Yaponchik never touches the money himself. He doesn't have to. There's a man named Dmitri, ex-military, with the neck of a bear and the calm of a librarian, who handles logistics. There's a woman named Anya, who does books with no calculator and no second drafts. There's a courier known only as Zhenya the Hat, who can disappear a suitcase faster than most men can spell passport. Every week, like clockwork, the gym opens at 10 p.m. No flyers, no invites. Just knowledge passed through cigarette smoke and coded nods. Inside, the crowd ranges from former Vori to real estate developers to off-duty city inspectors. They don't come for the fights. They come to be seen coming. Then one night, someone new shows up. A man in his late 40s. Smooth suit, awkward posture. Says his name is Alex. Orders mineral water and watches too carefully. Doesn't gamble, doesn't cheer. When the final round ends, he quietly walks out and climbs into a nondescript van with no plates. Yaponchik notices, doesn't react. 2 days later, that van is found abandoned in New Jersey with its seats slashed. No blood, no body. Just a page from a Russian novel, Crime and Punishment, folded to the paragraph where Raskolnikov considers confession. No one talks about it, but the next week's fights are delayed, just in case. This is how things work in Yaponchik's world. Through signals, through shadows, through gestures too subtle for agents with clipboards and wiretaps. The boxing ring becomes his new embassy, a place where law is suspended and loyalty is currency. Meanwhile, across the East River, the FBI is growing frustrated. They have files, photos, surveillance reports, but no charges that stick, because the witnesses all forget. The paper trails dissolve into shell companies, and Yaponchik himself remains maddeningly careful. He doesn't drive, doesn't drink, doesn't call, but he does observe. He notices that one of the newer fighters, Nikolai, a wiry Uzbek with a quick jab and nervous eyes, starts arriving late, making phone calls behind the venue, pacing too much between rounds. One evening, Yaponchik calls him over, offers him tea. They sit in silence for a long time. Then Yaponchik says softly, "Is your family still in Tashkent?" Nikolai blinks, nods. "Good," Yaponchik says, stirring honey into his tea. "Let's keep them there, safe." Nikolai leaves town the next morning. No suitcase. Some people say he went into hiding. Others say he was never real to begin with. That same week, the FBI increases their pressure. They start tailing known associates, freeze minor bank accounts, even schedule an accidental encounter at a Russian deli, where an agent bumps into Yaponchik and offers him a cigarette. Yaponchik declines, says, "I only smoke when I bury people." The agent laughs. Later, he files a report stating the subject is unusually composed under pressure and possibly capable of coded speech. No one reads it. Many people still think the underground fights were about money, but insiders know they were about mapping, relationships, loyalties, shifting pressures. So what do you think? Is violence the story, or just the punctuation? Despite the growing scrutiny, Yaponchik's operation expands. A new restaurant opens on Coney Island Avenue. It serves excellent lamb skewers and surprisingly good sushi. The front room is clean, the staff polite, the lighting flattering. The back room, reserved, always. No one asks. They just nod. And that's where the boxing ring's deals graduate. Now they're laundering real sums, moving properties, acquiring citizenships, rewriting records. One deal even involves a parking garage that becomes a staging point for armored trucks. Not for heists, for redistribution. Because now, Yaponchik isn't just a criminal. He's a logistician. He moves money, people, influence. He does it like he's managing a library, quietly, categorically, and always a step ahead. Still, he knows this can't last forever. Eyes are everywhere. Trust wears thin. Even the shadows get audited. So he starts preparing for something he hasn't done since the Sheremetyevo job. A vanish, not a retreat, not a surrender, a shift. He's not done yet, but he's thinking about the next chapter and about Miami. The air in Miami is different. Damp, fragrant, always carrying a hint of salt and deception. It hugs the skin instead of brushing past. For a man like Yaponchik, who spent decades in climates where the cold could kill a lie before it formed, this warmth feels foreign, suspicious even, but useful. He arrives not through Ellis Island nostalgia or some dramatic private jet, but like a rumor. First, someone spots a man in linen stepping out of a Lexus near Biscayne Boulevard. Then a maitre d' at a sushi lounge insists she's seated a very important Russian businessman who never ordered anything. Finally, a customs officer at the port of Miami notices a diplomatic vehicle with an unusual passenger manifest. By the time the FBI registers his presence, Yaponchik has already established a small constellation of businesses. Front and center is Kazumi, a Japanese fusion restaurant tucked between a pharmacy and a Cuban bakery. It seats 36, serves excellent toro, and always has one reservation mysteriously blocked out, no matter the day. The chef is real, the fish is fresh, but the books? The books tell a much stranger story. Inventories that don't match, suppliers who don't exist, and a staggering number of 999 private tasting sessions. Kazumi becomes a kind of embassy for men with passports in desk drawers and stories they don't share with their children. It's not flashy. That's the point. The wealthy don't want velvet ropes anymore. They want discretion, sashimi, and contracts folded into dessert menus. Yaponchik doesn't run the kitchen. He barely steps inside the dining area, but he's always nearby. On the second floor, in a cool room with tinted windows and a small table where tea is poured precisely and conversations begin with silence. One such conversation happens on a Tuesday. A man named Raul, a former banker from Panama with 2 white teeth, sits across from him. He's sweating lightly, despite the air conditioning. He's pitching an idea, a network of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency conversions, cross-border estate shelters, all legal in theory. But in practice, a pipeline for laundering billions. Yaponchik listens, doesn't interrupt. When Raul finishes, there's a long pause. Then, in that dry, careful voice, Yaponchik says, "That sounds exhausting." Raul laughs, then swallows, because it wasn't really a joke. The project moves forward, but slower. Yaponchik isn't in a hurry. He never is. He operates like water through limestone. Slow erosion, eventual dominance. Meanwhile, Miami welcomes him without fanfare. That's how cities like it roll. If you pay your taxes, don't shoot anyone publicly, and tip well, you can do nearly anything. He buys nothing in his own name. But there's a villa in Coral Gables with security cameras shaped like lanterns. There's a boat that never sails but gets cleaned weekly. There's a plastic surgeon who does wellness consultations in the evenings, always off record. And of course, the sushi chain isn't just one location. Within a year, there are 3, each one identical in decor, service, and odd backroom visitors. They call it Kazumi Group, a brand, a movement, a polite nod to international elegance. But the books tell you the real story. Money moving like tide water, always pulled by a moon no one sees. Federal agents in Miami start their own files. They notice that wherever Kazumi expands, small businesses nearby begin to disappear. Some are bought out. Others just close quietly, their owners vacationing somewhere permanent. Nobody complains. The sushi's too good. The noise too quiet. One agent named Eric becomes obsessed. He builds a dossier the size of a phone book, tracks plate numbers, interviews former employees, even tries the food, calls it hauntingly delicate. But after a year, he quits, transfers to Chicago, tells his boss he's not breaking laws, he's bending reality. At this point, Yaponchik's operation is multi-coastal. Moscow roots, Brooklyn branches, Miami flowers. He's not a kingpin. That word suggests ego. He's more like a cartographer, mapping out influence, redrawing borders that ignore police lines. But not everything is seamless. There's a man named Victor, sent from New York to assist with the Florida operations. Victor is young, ambitious, and impatient. He thinks the Kazumi front is too slow, too subtle. He wants nightclubs, flash, Bitcoin. He brings in new faces, loud, untrained, expendable. Yaponchik lets it simmer, watches. Then, one afternoon, Victor's name disappears from payroll. A quiet funeral takes place in New Jersey. Cause of death, boating accident. But the boat is never found, nor is Victor's phone. That same week, Kazumi's Miami flagship hosts a private dinner for 8 men. No last names, no contracts, just 8 perfectly wrapped pieces of nigiri, and an understanding that the old ways still hold weight. Many people still think Miami was where Ivankov lost control, that he spread too thin, got too relaxed. But others say this was his masterpiece, his silk painting in a sea of graffiti. So what do you think? Can a man disappear in plain sight if he wears enough linen and never speaks above a whisper? In Miami, his influence becomes ambient. He's not called in to settle disputes. Disputes avoid happening near him. He doesn't threaten. He just appears. And somehow, the check clears, and the problem forgets its own name. There's one final anecdote that floats through the Kazumi kitchens. A health inspector arrives unannounced one morning. Young, eager, clipboard in hand. He asks too many questions, stays too long, smells like cologne and ambition. As he finishes his inspection, he receives a single piece of paper from the hostess. No envelope, just a date and a name. He leaves without speaking, the report glowing. The restaurant, untouched. The name on the paper, never discussed again. One of the strangest things about Vyacheslav Ivankov was how rarely he needed to speak. He had that rare power, more effective than brute strength, more hypnotic than charisma, of making people speak less. The kind of presence that thickened air, that made even background noise feel self-conscious. And that presence, more than any gun or gang, was what allowed him to orchestrate one of the most curious criminal maneuvers of the decade, the Sheremetyevo job. It begins in 1989. Word reaches Yaponchik, quietly of course, that Moscow's international airport is due for a major shipment of industrial machine parts. Big, heavy crates, signed off by 3 layers of Soviet bureaucracy and routed through outdated surveillance channels. In other words, vulnerable. To the average thief, it's a logistics nightmare. To Ivankov, it's a chess problem. And he likes chess. He doesn't move on it immediately. First, he tests the water, sends a forged request for shipment delay. No one notices. Then, one of his people shows up to inspect the crates. A man posing as a ministry engineer with forged credentials so authentic, they smell of state ink. Inside those crates, not just parts, tucked in among gears and hydraulic cylinders, 120 bottles of French cognac, several boxes of banned Western electronics, and 3 Fabergé eggs, stolen from a private museum during renovations that no one remembers authorizing. The crates are routed, mislabeled, signed, and flown out of Moscow with nothing more than a rubber stamp and a joke about Russian efficiency. They arrive in Berlin 2 days later. The cargo is quietly divided and sold through 3 separate channels, one to a collector in Munich, one to a shipping company in Rotterdam, and one, allegedly, to a diplomat with expensive taste and no moral compass. The profit is enormous. But more than that, the statement is clear. The old rules are gone. The Soviet order is dying, and Yaponchik is already living by tomorrow's clock. And back in Moscow, not a whisper, because the paperwork is clean. The officers involved are either paid, promoted, or puzzled. No arrests, no headlines, just confusion and awe. It's said that when the KGB finally pieced it together, months later, they didn't open an official investigation. They opened a bottle of the same cognac, sat back and said, well, at least someone's good at logistics. Many people still think this was his greatest heist. Others argue it was simply a warm-up. So what do you think? Is mastery defined by the biggest job, or the one that leaves no echo? After Sheremetyevo, his legend inside Russia becomes myth. He's spoken of in half sentences, with smiles or shivers depending on the crowd. Some say he's in Cuba. Others claim he bought a train station in Prague just to store cash. A few believe he died and was replaced by a twin, but he is very much alive, and now back in Brooklyn. While Miami blossoms, he maintains a satellite presence in Brighton Beach. Here, in Little Odessa, his roots remain. Old contacts, old rules, the cold comfort of familiarity. He reopens the Jewelers Club, a boutique watch shop that technically never closed. Now it serves as both a symbol and a gateway. You don't just buy watches here. You buy silence, security, and sometimes sanctuary. One wall of the shop is lined with antique clocks. None of them work. That's intentional. Time, in Yaponchik's world, is not linear. It loops, folds, plays dead. Clients who sit in that room often leave unsure of how long they stayed. That's the point. A man walks in one day with a Rolex wrapped in newspaper, wants to trade it for information. He leaves with neither watch nor answers, but he does receive a phone call later that night. A single phrase is whispered, "No need to run." The next morning, the man withdraws his lawsuit and leaves for Argentina. The Rolex is never seen again. There's another man, a younger one, who arrives with ambition, talks too fast, wears mirrored sunglasses indoors. He tries to sell Yaponchik on an idea involving prepaid calling cards and East European call routing. Yaponchik listens for 10 minutes, then interrupts with, "Why don't you just steal newspapers?" The man stutters, doesn't understand. "Less profit," Yaponchik says, sipping his tea, "but more honest." The meeting ends. The idea dies, but the lesson lingers. By now, his network stretches across more than cities. It stretches across cultures. In Paris, he has a man who imports vintage wine, but really sells exit visas. In Montreal, a quiet tailor who fits suits that double as armor. In Tel Aviv, a woman with a bookstore that never has customers, yet always turns a profit. And yet, despite all this, he keeps a small apartment. No luxury penthouse, no marble counters, just a worn leather chair, a desk with an ashtray, and a view of a parking lot. The ashtray stays clean. The parking lot never changes. But he stares out often, perhaps watching patterns, or maybe just pretending to. What troubles him now isn't law enforcement. It's decay. He sees it in his own ranks. Men cutting corners. Loyalty traded for faster profit. Some even cooperate with the police, not out of fear, but laziness. There's a meeting one evening. 7 men sit around a table. The tea is hot. The bread is warm. The room is cold. Yaponchik says one thing. "Do you know what happens when a house burns? The rats run first, but the walls, they remember." No one responds. But one man doesn't show up to the next meeting. His chair stays empty for months. Eventually, they stop setting a plate for him. The message is clear. You don't break the code, and you don't forget who's watching the clocks. By 1991, Vyacheslav Ivankov's name isn't whispered so much as implied. It's in the way someone pauses before saying, "the Russian guy." It's in the look exchanged between 2 men at the back of a restaurant when a third asks, "Who owns that building now?" It's in the silence that follows a question that should never have been asked out loud. The Soviet Union collapses that year, finally and irreversibly. On the streets of Moscow, statues come down, currencies spiral, and old generals suddenly find themselves driving taxis or selling knockoff cologne in underground kiosks. But in the world Yaponchik moves through, the chaos doesn't create fear. It creates opportunity. Back in the US, he watches the news with a calm face and a glass of water beside him. The fall of the USSR doesn't surprise him. He saw the rot years ago, when bribes became as common as bread and loyalty could be purchased with imported shampoo. What it does change is the flow of people. Brighton Beach becomes busier, not just tourists or hopeful immigrants, but seasoned men with pasts too complicated for paperwork. Former colonels, disgraced officials, mid-tier enforcers with dreams of upper-tier incomes. They arrive in leather jackets with polished shoes and stories that don't quite add up. Yaponchik doesn't meet most of them. He doesn't need to. He hears who's worth hearing about. He pays attention when a new face doesn't blink at the sound of a name, or when someone speaks fluent Georgian but claims to be Ukrainian. One such man, Andrei, arrives with charm, clean hands, and a reputation for solving problems with unorthodox diplomacy. He gets invited to Kazumi. One dinner, 3 courses, a 20-minute conversation about salmon preparation techniques. He leaves with a new phone number and a job that doesn't technically exist. This is the year of golden teeth, as some of his crew will later call it. Money flows. A lot of it. From Moscow, Kyiv, Almaty. Not cash so much as capital. Bonds, real estate, art, favors. The Russian oligarchs are coming into being, and they need channels. Legal ones, illegal ones, and something in between. They want American banks, Caribbean holding companies, European luxury. But most of all, they want someone who can explain how to move power without drawing light. That's where Yaponchik shines. His crew expands, carefully. For every 5 who want in, 1 is selected. And even then, the test begins after recruitment. He observes, always. Gives no feedback, just opportunity. If they rise, he nods. If they stumble, they disappear. Not violently, just without ceremony. Among the newcomers is a man named Pavel, known on the street as Zuby, Russian for teeth. He earns the nickname not for his smile, but for the row of gold-capped molars he flashes when nervous. Zuby handles recycling, code for buying failing businesses and making them profitable in ways that rarely involve sales. Under Zuby's lead, the crew picks up a failing electronics shop, a dry cleaner, and a pawn business that operates mostly in antique religious icons. Within 6 months, each location is turning a profit, not just on paper, real money, in unmarked bills and unspoken promises. But Yaponchik doesn't celebrate. He studies the pattern. He knows too much growth invites questions. He begins rotating meeting spots weekly. Some weeks they meet at an ice cream parlor in Queens. Other weeks in the back room of a Russian language theater that never has scheduled performances. The code is, if you see 2 pigeons on the awning, enter. If not, go home. One of his most trusted men, Leonid, asks him why they change locations so often. Yaponchik's response, if someone drops a glass in a different room every week, you never know which room to clean. Meanwhile, the American authorities continue to watch. The FBI's Red Star Task Force, formed to monitor Russian organized crime, now has a binder with his face on the cover. Inside, photos of him getting into cars, a blurry surveillance shot of him sipping tea, and a memo that reads, extremely intelligent, operates through silence and structure. They send in someone new, a Russian-American agent named Sergei, born in New Jersey but fluent in criminal slang. He pretends to be a consultant for restaurant imports, gets close to one of Yaponchik's lower-level associates, has dinner twice at Kazumi, orders wrong both times, laughs too loudly, tries too hard. Yaponchik never addresses him directly, but at the 3rd dinner, Sergei finds a folded note under his napkin. No name, just one line. You're chasing ghosts, eat faster. He never comes back. Many people still think Ivankov had a spy inside the FBI. Others say he was just that good at reading people. So, what do you think? Does it take inside information? Or just an inside instinct? The gold keeps coming. Not literal bars, but value, dressed in suits and briefcases. Everyone wants a piece of America. A small shop here, a silent stake in a hotel, a favor that turns into a building permit. Yaponchik becomes the gateway, the customs agent of the new Russian elite, but he never flaunts it. His suits are simple, well-tailored. His watch never shines too bright. His shoes always polished, rarely expensive. He drives, if ever, in borrowed cars, and keeps no permanent home. He stays mobile, light, just like he taught in the cells of Butyrka. If you can't be pinned down, you can't be framed. And then something changes. He begins taking long walks at night, alone, down Brighton Beach Avenue, past shops he partly owns but never enters, past the boardwalk where the Atlantic crashes with a rhythm as steady as his pulse. He watches the lights, listens to the gulls, sometimes stops to feed pigeons with sunflower seeds pulled from a cloth pouch. One night, Zuby joins him. They don't speak for 5 full minutes. Then Yaponchik says, "You know what the problem is with golden teeth?" Zuby shrugs. They rot underneath, quietly, and with that, the walk ends. In the hushed tension of early 1990s America, while malls played Whitney Houston and diners served cherry pie beneath flickering fluorescence, Yaponchik moved through Little Odessa like a whisper wearing wool. But now, the geography shifts again. He's disappearing from Brooklyn more often. Miami isn't just a vacation. It's becoming a second center. The move is subtle. Nothing public. No closed signs or sold leases. The jeweler's club still ticks. Kazumi still serves its paper-thin tuna, and the watches still change wrists with quiet agreement. But more and more, his associates get their instructions via proxy. The table is set. The chair is waiting, but the man in linen isn't always there, because by now, he's built something in Miami that requires refinement. Florida in the 1990s is a crossroads. Sunburnt tourists, offshore bankers, CIA ghosts, and exiles playing dominoes over espresso. But underneath the neon and citrus lies something darker, a hunger for laundering, and not just money, history. Everyone here wants to be someone else. Everyone is rewriting their story. Ivankov, meanwhile, is simply editing his. One of his first quiet acquisitions is a sushi bar in Coral Gables, Kazumi 2. The menu is identical to the Brooklyn flagship, down to the punctuation. Even the music is curated. Quiet koto melodies layered beneath low conversation. A type of psychological sedation. In the back room, conversations that could rewire economies are carried out over matcha and glances. But his masterpiece is what comes next, the sushi front. It's not just restaurants anymore. It's a system, a network of boutique dining experiences stretched across select coastal cities. Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, even a test kitchen in New Orleans that closes after only 4 nights. Its existence denied by everyone involved. Each location serves exquisite food. Each one files tax returns. Each one is registered to a shell corporation headquartered in Cyprus, overseen by a holding firm in Luxembourg, whose board members are mostly dead or imaginary. You can't trace the money. You can't trace the owners. What you can trace is the influence, because suddenly, city permits get approved faster. Border seizures decline. Inspections vanish before they're scheduled. A waiter receives a parking ticket and has it canceled before he gets home. A dishwasher applies for a green card and is quietly naturalized within 6 weeks. One Kazumi customer, an aging lobbyist with a fondness for eels and danger, describes the restaurant as a black hole that gives you favors instead of stealing your atoms. Yaponchik never smiles at compliments. Instead, he asks, "Do you like your eel warm or cold?" He never forgets preferences. Even the FBI admits quietly that they're baffled because the sushi front is legal on paper, on balance sheets, on municipal records. But the thing about legality is that it doesn't measure intent. Many people still think the sushi front was simply a money laundering scheme. But those closer to it, those who sat in the back rooms and signed napkins, know better. It wasn't about washing money. It was about making it disappear entirely. So what do you think? Is it laundering if the stain was never there to begin with? Still, as always, there's a crack. One location, Kazumi, Tampa, has an employee who doesn't fit. Too curious, too quiet. A pastry chef named Eli, formerly of Tel Aviv. He makes perfect desserts but asks too many questions. He's seen near the office printer at odd hours. One night, a backdoor alarm goes off for the first time in months. Yaponchik hears about it not from management, but from the valet. He doesn't confront Eli. Instead, he invites him to a tasting. Eli shows up on time, nervous. Served 6 courses, each more delicate than the last. The 7th course, a dessert, never comes. Instead, Yaponchik places a folded note on the table. It reads, "In kitchens like this, knives don't forget." Eli resigns the next morning, leaves town 2 days later. No trace. The replacement pastry chef doesn't ask about him. That's how the front operates. It's not just restaurants. It's a filter, a place to measure loyalty, discretion, temperament. If you fit, you rise. If you don't, you fade. No need for punishment. The silence is punishment enough. But even among all this elegance, he doesn't forget Brooklyn. Once a month he returns, never scheduled, no warning. He walks into the jeweler's club like a man checking in on his past. Sometimes he brings a new watch. Sometimes he takes one. Once, he trades a Rolex for a book, a 1936 Georgian printing of the knight in the panther's skin. He doesn't explain, just nods, and everyone nods back. Back in Miami, a man named Arturo begins showing up. Late 30s, always in suits a half size too tight, with eyes that never settle. He works for someone, DEA maybe, or a rival group. He asks about fish shipments, about chef visas, about property lines. One night, he sits at the sushi bar and says, loudly, "You know this place is cleaner than a hospital?" Yaponchik, seated a few stools away, lifts his tea and says, "Good. Clean places make for clean exits." Arturo doesn't return. Soon after, a brief memo circulates in a government office. Subject continues to exhibit calculated evasiveness. Front appears legal but culturally impenetrable. Recommendation: cease direct contact. Observe only. He's no longer a suspect. He's an environment. By the end of 1993, the sushi front has done more than fund his operations. It has created a shield. A world so curated, so pristine, that no one wants to question it too loudly. Because who questions perfection? And who interrogates a man who's never in the same room long enough to catch a lie? Brighton Beach doesn't change much, even when the world does. The storefronts still display Cyrillic signs. The bagels still have a crust that could dent a windshield. And the old men on the benches still argue about chess moves made in 1964. But what does change quietly and decisively is the presence of Vyacheslav Ivankov, Yaponchik, in the daily rhythms of the place. He's no longer just a name whispered. He's a question mark in every deal, a shadow at every negotiation, an unclaimed seat in every room. He doesn't need to speak. By now, he's fluent in absence, but that doesn't stop the FBI from trying. With Miami operations stable and the sushi front becoming almost a joke among agents, "Have you eaten at Yaponchik's tonight?" They quip. The Bureau intensifies efforts in New York. Task forces are reshuffled, budgets are expanded, and one priority becomes crystal clear: decode this man. So they send in linguists, analysts, behavioral experts. One agent, a Russian studies PhD from Yale, spends 3 months trying to translate intercepted conversations from Kazumi staff. He gives up after realizing half the words are invented slang, the other half, deliberate misdirection. They bug everything: phones, cars, a water pipe in the hallway outside his suspected residence. Even the palm tree next to Kazumi Coral Gables gets fitted with a mic, disguised as part of the irrigation system. The result? Dozens of hours of silence. Or worse, chatter about tea leaves, crossword puzzles, and fish storage temperatures. Because Yaponchik doesn't talk business in words, he talks in timing. He changes walking routes every week. He pays for groceries with exact change. He never sends 2 couriers along the same route. Even the way he pauses before entering a room becomes code. It's not paranoia. It's architecture. He's built a world where language is almost optional. There's one moment that nearly breaks the Bureau's resolve. An undercover agent, Flaherty, is assigned to pose as a real estate developer looking to buy a small restaurant space in Brighton. He's clean, credible, speaks passable Russian. He walks into the jeweler's club one afternoon and pretends to browse watches. As he leans over a glass case, he hears a voice behind him say, "Your belt has a serial number. Why?" "It's Yaponchik." Calm, curious, not hostile, just accurate. Flaherty turns, stammers something about customs and imports. Yaponchik nods, picks up a small silver pocket watch and says, "Time's funny. Some people wear it too loud." Then he walks away. Flaherty is pulled off the case 3 days later. Many people still think Ivankov's mastery was mystical, that he had psychic senses or informants in every agency, but maybe it wasn't magic. So what do you think? Is it supernatural to notice what others ignore? Meanwhile, in Brighton, the jeweler's club becomes more than a front. It becomes a sanctuary, not for criminals necessarily, but for men who live complicated lives. Men who can't go back, can't go straight, and can't afford to be misunderstood. A Ukrainian smuggler comes in once a month. He never speaks, just places a coin on the counter and leaves. A Chechen bookmaker brings homemade jam, which Yaponchik always accepts, but never opens. One night, a washed-up Soviet chess champion wanders in and collapses into a chair. Yaponchik brings him tea, plays 3 games, loses 2 intentionally, and sends him off with cab fare and a soft handshake. This is power, not built on fear but predictability. And yet, something shifts. One of his old allies, Mikhail the Fork Vyacheslav, resurfaces. Mikhail was part of the Sheremetyevo play, one of the men who saw the Fabergé eggs with his own eyes. But he's different now. Bloated, flashy, whispering names he shouldn't know. He starts meeting with people Yaponchik doesn't trust. A nightclub owner from Manhattan, a Turkish financier who can't pronounce vor vzakone, a man from Tel Aviv with too many questions and no eyebrows. Yaponchik watches, doesn't act, until Mikhail shows up at Kazumi, Brooklyn one night, drunk, loud, and with a woman too young to know who he used to be. He demands a private table, says, "Tell Yaponchik his old friend wants a favor." The staff nods. The table is set, but the food never arrives. Instead, a single slip of paper is placed before him. Not all clocks tick forward. Mikhail leaves. The woman looks confused. He looks terrified. He's found in Atlantic City a week later, face down in an ice bath. No signs of struggle, no wounds, just gone. The coroner writes, heart failure. The waitress who served him last says he Looked like a man who realized he forgot something important but couldn't remember what. Word travels. The message is clear. Loyalty has a half-life, but disrespect has a timestamp. Still, the FBI persists. They try to flip people. Some crack. Some vanish. One even agrees to testify, then gets run over by a postal truck with expired plates. Accidental, they say. Of course, but something inside the Bureau shifts too. After years of surveillance, paperwork, missed chances, they start to doubt their own tools. One internal memo reads, "Subject's operation is more cultural than criminal. He is not building an empire. He's maintaining a cathedral." And perhaps that's true, because to Yaponchik, it's not about power, it's about preservation. Of a code, a rhythm, a world where things made sense, not always morally, but structurally. At the end of that year, he sits in the back of the jeweler's club with a chessboard. Across from him is a teenage courier who delivered a package on time for 6 months without ever looking inside. A test, of course. The kid plays the first move, a pawn to e4. Yaponchik counters, knight to f6. The kid says, "You always play that." Yaponchik shrugs. Why change what already works? And the game begins. By the mid-1990s, the FBI has a new nickname for him, the Fog. Not just for the way he seems to appear and vanish from coast to coast, but because any attempt to grasp him, through paperwork, surveillance, or informants, slips through the fingers like morning mist. He's not just a man anymore. He's an operating condition. And as his operations span from sushi lounges in Miami to boutique watch shops in Brooklyn, from shell companies in Cyprus to unnamed accounts in Toronto, Vyacheslav Ivankov seems untouchable. But no one is untouchable forever. The Bureau doesn't give up. They change strategy. Less about him, more about his gravity, the people orbiting him. They map phone records, track license plates, follow parcels. Every napkin scribble becomes a potential warrant. Every tea shop becomes a listening post. And finally, they get something. Not big, not dramatic, but sharp. A slip. An intermediary missteps. A phone call made from a landline in a Brighton cafe links an extortion demand to an address connected to a company tied to a Shell account, which eventually ties back to Kazumi Coral Gables. It's enough for a grand jury. A federal indictment is issued in early 1995. The charge: conspiracy to commit extortion. Specifically, accusations that Yaponchik had tried to extract $4 million from an up-and-coming businessman in the Russian-American nightclub circuit. The man had resisted once. Then, allegedly, his cousin was assaulted and his venue firebombed. Whether or not Yaponchik orchestrated it remains debatable, but the papers are signed. On June 8, 1995, Vyacheslav Ivankov is arrested in Miami by federal agents. No SWAT team, no drama. He's exiting a spa, wearing slippers. When they cuff him, he doesn't protest. Just says, "Took you long enough." The arrest makes international news. Russian mafia boss captured in Florida. Papers throw around words like kingpin, godfather, don of dons. Television panels host experts who struggle to pronounce his name. The image is almost cinematic. The elusive ghost, finally caught. But those close to him, both friend and foe, feel something else: uncertainty. Because arresting Yaponchik doesn't mean you understand him. It doesn't mean the structure falls. It means something new has begun. At his arraignment, he stands calm, impeccably dressed, eyes cool. He pleads not guilty. His lawyer, a man with a jaw like a mailbox and a tie that cost more than a car, argues entrapment, vague testimony, cultural misunderstanding. The FBI pushes back, presenting surveillance, call logs, and 2 cooperating witnesses, but even the judge seems uneasy. The courtroom feels quiet, not tense, just hushed, as if everyone senses they're watching someone who understands the walls better than the architects. In custody, Ivankov becomes inmate 714036, held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. He's placed under close watch, high security, no visitors for 30 days. His mail is screened, his cell inspected daily, but he doesn't break, he adapts. Within weeks, the guards begin to note something strange. Other inmates refer to him with an odd formality. Some offer food, others step aside when he passes. Even the prison barber cuts his hair with near reverence. He starts hosting games of chess in the yard, never asks, just sets up the board and waits. Players come to him. Some are decent, most are not. He never humiliates them. Wins softly, always with a compliment. "Your bishop sees better than you do," he once says with a half smile. He reads too. Mostly nonfiction, mostly quiet. Dostoevsky returns to his shelf. So does Gogol. There's a rumor that he's working on a memoir, dictated in code through crossword puzzles passed between cells. The prison library adds 2 new Russian titles during his stay. No one knows who requested them. The FBI increases pressure. They push for more testimony. Try to flip his inner circle. But those still free say nothing. And those who've been arrested before remember something crucial. Yaponchik never forgets who kept quiet. One prosecutor describes him as frustratingly composed. Adds, "It's like trying to convict an echo." Meanwhile, back in Brighton Beach, people walk differently. Some look nervous, others look relieved. But one man, a baker who used to supply Kazumi, puts it best. He says, "It's not over. He's just letting us breathe." And in Miami, Kazumi Coral Gables operates with eerie precision. The back room remains reserved. The staff remains silent. And every Friday, a single teacup is placed at a corner table. It stays untouched. A ritual, or maybe a reminder. Many people still think the FBI had everything lined up, that Yaponchik was finished. But inside those concrete walls, he wasn't pacing. He was planning. So what do you think? Does arrest remove power or just move it? In court, months into the trial, a witness stumbles. He refers to Yaponchik as Sir. The courtroom freezes for half a second, then moves on. But the jury notices. By the end of 1996, the trial concludes. The verdict? Guilty. He's sentenced to just under 10 years in federal prison. The courtroom doesn't cheer. The agents don't smile. Because even in defeat, Ivankov seems intentional, as if this too was part of the plan. Later that night, in his cell, he removes the plastic spoon from dinner, turns it over, and slowly begins scraping the edge of a blank notebook. Not as escape, just to shape it, to refine it. Because even here, behind bars, Vyacheslav Yaponchik Ivankov is still the architect, and the blueprint is still unfolding. The walls of prison don't confine Yaponchik, they define him. Inside Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution, where he's transferred shortly after sentencing, things are different from the hard Soviet cells of Butyrka or the whispered corridors of the Moscow underworld. This is America's version of punishment, orderly, industrial, dispassionate. But to a man like Ivankov, it's a familiar kind of theater. The stage is cleaner, the costumes different, but the drama is the same. Guards try to treat him like any other inmate, but he's not like any other inmate. He doesn't posture, doesn't pace, doesn't complain. He observes. In the first 2 weeks, he identifies which officers can be bribed, which inmates owe gambling debts, and which food supplier is skimming off commissary contracts. Not because he's digging, He's listening. And in prison, everything talks. Eventually, he's assigned a cellmate, a 20-something white-collar convict from Chicago who once ran a fake charity for veterans. The kid babbles at first, trying to impress. Drops names. Mentions the Russian mob like it's a movie franchise. Yaponchik says nothing. After 3 days, the kid goes quiet. After 3 weeks, he transfers cells without being asked. Yaponchik inherits the bunk and a chess set with 2 pawns missing. It's not long before inmates from other wings begin approaching him. Quietly, cautiously, they offer favors. Some just want advice. One wants protection. Another wants permission. Always respectfully. Always indirectly. They know who he is, not from the newspapers, but from how he listens. Even the guards start shifting around him. They stop slamming doors near his block. They begin using titles when they speak to him. Sir. Mr. Ivankov. One calls him boss without irony. He never corrects them. He starts running things. Not overtly. He doesn't give orders. He gives options. A man owes money. He suggests a payment schedule. A dispute brews over stolen commissary. He proposes a chess match. Winner keeps the Snickers bars. Loser apologizes publicly. Nobody wants to play dirty when Yaponchik's watching. His influence spreads across cultures. Latino gangs begin deferring to him in line. Black gangs nod when he walks the yard. Even the Aryans, normally loud, crude, and allergic to subtlety, stop short when they see him reading. He reads a lot, mostly Russian literature. Some philosophy. The occasional book on economics. He claims it's for language maintenance, but really, it's calibration. Prison is noise. Books are signal. There's one moment, small, almost laughable, that becomes legend inside. A guard throws out a comment during cell inspections. All you criminals think you're smarter than the system. Yaponchik looks up from his copy of War and Peace and says, "No, we think we're older than it." The guard doesn't respond, but the quote ends up scribbled on the wall of Block C within 2 days. Many people still think Ivankov ruled from within because of fear. But the truth is simpler. He brought order. So what do you think? Is leadership about dominance or reliability? Years pass. He receives visitors rarely. A lawyer, an interpreter, a man from Brooklyn who never gives his name. They talk about poetry, business permits, Ukrainian politics. Once, a guard reports that Yaponchik and a visitor sat for an hour in silence, then shook hands and parted. Most productive meeting I've ever seen, the guard says. He never shows anger. But once, a rumor spreads that a young Russian inmate disrespected the code, stole from the obshchak, and blamed it on another. No formal punishment is given. But within a week, the kid transfers, voluntarily, to a facility 2 states away. He refuses to explain. Just mutters, "I don't want to play chess with that man." Inside, Yaponchik continues to file appeals. Slowly, strategically. Not to shorten his sentence, but to buy time. To shape perception. Every legal motion he submits contains a small inconsistency, a slight delay, a chance to build ambiguity around his case. Was it extortion? Was it business? Was he misinterpreted? His lawyer says, he's not fighting the sentence. He's choreographing it. Outside, his name remains relevant. The sushi front quietly adapts. Kazumi restaurants begin closing and reopening under new names. Suki, Tomoru. Even a French-Japanese hybrid in Atlanta called Poisson Neige. Ownership structures shift. Former employees take over as founders. One opens a flower shop next door to a dry cleaner and suddenly buys a Mercedes in cash. Authorities scratch their heads, but no patterns emerge, because the pattern is the lack of pattern. And all roads still whisper back to Yaponchik. He hears about this from letters, carefully coded. No paper ever carries his real name, but the meaning is always clear. The structure lives. Even inside, he mentors, not in formal lessons, but through his presence. Younger inmates start sitting straighter when he's nearby. They listen more, talk less, gamble quieter. One man stops drawing tattoos after Yaponchik glances at his unfinished skull design and says, "That one speaks too loud." Beaks. Another man, a lifer named Lenny, starts writing haiku after seeing Yaponchik stare at a cherry blossom tree in the yard for half an hour. He says it seemed like the tree was the only one not afraid of him, but it isn't fear, it's geometry. A calm center in a spiraling system. One day, the warden walks past Ivankov's cell and finds him sketching floor plans of a building that doesn't exist. He asks if it's a real place. Yaponchik says, "Not yet." The drawing disappears by nightfall, and through all this, years, seasons, changes, the clocks in the prison library remain synchronized to his schedule. When he enters, the librarian turns down the radio. When he exits, the lights seem to brighten just slightly. Not because he demands it, just because he calibrates the air around him. He receives parole hearing notifications, declines them all. Not ready, not yet, because something is stirring. Not in Brooklyn, not in Miami, but back in Moscow. And when the time comes, the question won't be if he returns. It'll be, what does Moscow become when Yaponchik walks its streets again? In the spring of 2004, a letter arrives. It's not formal. No government seal. No diplomatic flourish. Just a single envelope, delivered through an attorney who says little and leaves even less behind. The message inside is short. 12 words. Your return is requested. Moscow waits. Everything else is in place. Vyacheslav Yaponchik. Ivankov reads it once, folds it, slips it into the back of the Master and Margarita. Then he closes the book and places it on the metal shelf above his bunk, like he's setting down a chess piece with quiet finality. The next morning, he requests a transfer to speak with the prison warden. Within 2 weeks, the wheels are moving. He is released, not because his sentence is over, but because the Russian government formally requests his extradition. Not to prosecute, to receive, to reclaim. A diplomatic formality wrapped in something older and colder than law. Some say it's political. Others call it strategic. The official reason is a series of outstanding inquiries connected to financial cases back home. But no one really believes it. You don't bring a man like Yaponchik back to Moscow to question him. You bring him back to balance the scales. He boards a plane with minimal ceremony. No cuffs, no press. Just 2 plainclothes officers, a private charter, and a list of names that doesn't appear on any official manifest. When he lands, it's early morning. The sky is gunmetal gray. The air tastes like rust. Moscow has changed, or at least it thinks it has. New cars, glass towers, fancy coffee. But the bones are the same. The rhythm, the shrug, the silence beneath all the noise. And as Yaponchik steps off the plane and into the cool air, there's something in his gait that says, let's begin again. He doesn't return to his old apartment, long gone. Instead, he's taken to a modest compound on the outskirts of the city. High walls, clean floors, cameras you don't see until you're inside. The man who greets him wears a gray suit and speaks like he's narrating someone else's dream. "Welcome home," the man says. Yaponchik responds with a nod. That night, Moscow feels it. Somewhere, deep in the undercurrent, a ripple passes through the criminal ecosystem. Old players glance at their phones without knowing why. A silence hangs a second longer in high-level meetings. Even the air feels heavier. like a long-forgotten oath has just been whispered again. Over the following weeks, Yaponchik does not reappear in public. He is not seen at nightclubs or restaurants or parties, but things begin to shift. A man with ties to 3 regional casinos suddenly changes his business model. A former colonel turned money launderer cancels a deal with a Turkish firm. A mid-tier oligarch has a quiet falling out with a deputy minister, all in the same week, all without visible cause, because now Yaponchik is back, not as a gangster, but as a gravity well, a point around which other things rotate. No crown, no ceremony, just presence. He begins receiving visitors, at first, quietly, then less so. One man arrives in a Mercedes that's 2 years too new, leaves 10 minutes later looking 5 years older. Another, an old rival, rumored to have betrayed a code in '92, shows up with a bottle of Armenian brandy. They speak for 4 minutes. He leaves empty-handed and hasn't been seen since. The men he meets aren't criminals, per se. They're structural elements. Bankers, regulators, security officers, cultural attachés. Men who know how to move things without being seen. Men who remember the old ways, but dress in the new. In these conversations, Yaponchik barely speaks. He asks questions. Why did you change suppliers? What does the sun do? Is he loyal to you or to the outcome? These aren't inquiries. They're diagnostics, and the answers rewrite trajectories. The criminal landscape is shifting again, not in blood, but in configuration. The street gangs don't understand. They operate on chaos. Carjackings, drugs, flashy muscle. But above them, the suits start walking differently. They carry smaller phones, sign fewer papers, avoid eye contact with journalists. The message is clear. The architect has returned, but not everything is simple. There are new players now. Men who rose while Yaponchik was locked away. They're slick, younger, louder. They tweet. They drive Bentleys. They post vacation photos. One even tries to publish a memoir. From Streets to Steel, The Rise of the New Russian Order. A copy lands on Yaponchik's desk. He reads the first chapter, says nothing. The publisher is bought out 3 weeks later by a firm with no clear origin. The book is pulled from shelves. The author is never mentioned again. No threats, no scenes, just redirection. Many people still think Moscow welcomed him back with open arms. But in truth, the city braced for him. So what do you think? Is a king still a king if his court has moved to a new castle? One afternoon, he visits a cemetery. No guards, no entourage, just him, a black coat, and a small bouquet of forget-me-nots. He kneels beside an old grave, faded, unkempt, forgotten. An associate asks him later, "Family?" Yaponchik replies, "Memory, that's all." At night, in his compound, he takes long walks. The guards don't follow. The cameras do. Sometimes he stops, looks at the sky, and mutters phrases in Georgian, words that don't appear in most dictionaries. Not curses, not prayers, just traces. The Moscow he left is gone, but the Moscow he remembers, it's still in formation. Moscow's nights have always held secrets, layered in steam rising off manhole covers, tucked beneath the low hum of Ladas passing at 2 a.m., folded between blocks of Soviet concrete. But now, the secrets walk again, not as whispers or rumors, but as rituals resumed. Yaponchik doesn't return to power with fanfare. He doesn't need parades or news clips or a seat at the oligarch's dinner table. His throne is wherever people stop talking when he enters a room. And in Moscow, those rooms are many. He operates from the shadows of legitimacy. A new company appears, registered in Vladivostok, with a name so bland it sounds made up. Regional Maritime Logistics. No phone number, no website. But its offices sit near a shipping port. One day, a fleet of refrigerated trucks starts arriving. Not one is inspected. The following week, a fish distributor in Belarus gets bought out by an anonymous investor. Suddenly, smoked sturgeon becomes expensive again. He's moving cargo, but not just fish, documents, jewelry, pharmaceuticals. Rumor has it, even people, though nothing ever sticks. Still, he doesn't get his hands dirty. The structure runs itself now. Layers of operators. Every conversation filtered through 3 phones, 2 interpreters, and 1 man who insists he's just a tax consultant. And yet, when a bribe is delivered, it's folded exactly once and placed under a black napkin, just as it was 20 years ago in Brooklyn. The American press catches wind. The ghost of Brighton Beach returns to Moscow, they write. The Russian press, silent. No one prints his name. But one editorial refers to the invisible gentleman whose calendar is carved into others' decisions. He chuckles when he hears that. Still, his days are quiet. He wakes early, drinks black tea, reads, mostly political theory now, or biographies of Roman generals. In the afternoons, he takes meetings. Not many. Never more than 1 or 2. Lawyers, union heads, mid-level bureaucrats. Everyone arrives tense. Everyone leaves. Changed. Evenings are for walking. Sometimes he visits old cafes, places that survived the collapse and rebirth. He orders the same thing. Herring, black bread, and kvass. Always leaves a tip. Always exact. And sometimes, rarely, he talks. To a trusted few, he offers thoughts. Not commands, not orders, just observations. Too much growth too fast is just rot in a tuxedo. Fear isn't power, it's a reminder. Buildings don't lean, they remember how they were built. He still speaks like a man who edits history in real time. But under the calm, a tremor begins. It starts with a shooting. Small time, wrong district. A man connected to an old debt. The kind of thing that wouldn't normally reach his desk. But this one does, because the man was killed by a kid. No tattoos, no history, just hunger and Instagram followers. Yaponchik watches the video. The kid films himself before the job. Says, "I'm gonna be the next Don." He never finishes the upload. When the phone is recovered, it's already been factory reset. The account deleted. His name vanished from all traces. Yaponchik doesn't rage. He reconsiders. Because this is the new generation. Flashy, loud, hungry for myth, but allergic to structure. And in their ambition, they threaten the very foundation he built. The code. So he calls a meeting, not of soldiers, of historians, men who know the old language, who remember Butyrka, who still bow slightly when they speak. They meet in a bathhouse, of course. Old wood, hot stones, silence before speech. He lays it out. We built a cathedral, and now they spray graffiti on its walls. They don't want power. They want screenshots of it. He pauses, sips tea. The steam hides his eyes. I won't fight them, but I won't leave them a map either. The men nod, and something begins to shift. Operations go deeper underground. Front companies dissolve, names change, paper trails evaporate. Where once there was a traceable network, now there's fog again. He's ghosting himself, not out of fear, but as an act of conservation, because even legends must hibernate. Still, not all things are reversible. His health begins to fray. He coughs more, sleeps less. The long walks become shorter. One afternoon, he collapses briefly in his study. When a doctor insists on tests, Yaponchik asks only one question. How long will I remain functional? The answer is vague, but he nods like he expected worse. Many people still think Ivankov faded away in quiet glory. But some say he was preparing something. A succession. A silencing. So what do you think? Does a true strategist die with noise or become part of the architecture? In his final summer, he revisits a small village outside Tbilisi. where he was born, where he first learned how to walk without being heard. The trees have changed. The air is softer. A boy sells sunflower seeds at the gate of a crumbling school. Yaponchik buys a bag, hands over a full ruble, doesn't ask for change, just walks. And when he returns to Moscow, the city doesn't roar. It exhales, like something important has been decided, but no one knows exactly what. The city doesn't hold funerals for men like Vyacheslav Ivankov. It holds its breath, not because it fears him, not anymore, but because when a man like Yaponchik fades from the physical world, the structures he influenced, seen and unseen, don't crumble. They recalibrate. In the weeks following his walk through Tbilisi and the long silences of his final summer, Moscow begins to hum in a different frequency. Not louder, not quieter, just tighter, more focused, like a wire stretched an inch farther than before. He's not dead, not yet, but something in the rhythm of the city knows what's coming, and so do the men who used to report to him. One of them, Oleg, a former customs broker turned facilitator of paperless solutions, starts driving slower. Another, Yuri, who once ran 3 apartment blocks that technically didn't exist, sends his family to Cyprus and begins drinking his coffee black again. It's not grief, it's preparation. Because when a ghost begins to fade, the walls must learn to support themselves. Yaponchik, meanwhile, is still present. He walks less now, sleeps more, reads only poetry, Pushkin, Akhmatova, sometimes Basho. There's a leather chair by the window in his study and a small brass bell on the table. The bell rings once a day, not to summon anyone, just to test the air. His staff speaks quietly. His doctor visits twice a week, never after dusk. There's an understanding among those closest to him. The house must remain balanced. He eats simply, soups, black bread, a little cheese. But every Thursday, he requests herring, salted, not pickled, served on the same plate, with a folded napkin tucked underneath. No one knows why. No one asks. One Thursday, the herring goes untouched. He doesn't speak all day. That night, the clocks in the house stop, briefly, mysteriously, then resume. A security camera catches him in the hallway at 3:42 a.m., standing still, staring at a bookshelf. Then he turns and returns to bed. In the morning, he doesn't mention it, just asks for tea and the chess set, his old set, the one from Butyrka. He plays a full game alone, white and black, careful, deliberate, wins both sides. When asked later who won, he simply says, "The position." It's around this time that people from his past start reappearing, men with gray hair and nervous eyes. A woman with a scar on her hand he once kissed in gratitude. A former diplomat from Azerbaijan who now works in textiles. They don't come to beg or reminisce. They come to report. They update him on things that don't make the news. A port in Sochi that changed ownership. A banker who canceled a trip. A governor's daughter who now owns a shipping company. He listens. Occasionally nods. Sometimes chuckles. But mostly he listens, because he's not building anymore. He's bequeathing. There's one visitor who stands out. A young man, mid-30s, calm, lean, sharp eyes, speaks little, carries himself like someone who's had to walk away from explosions without turning around. No one introduces him by name. Yaponchik doesn't ask, but he does share tea with him, and later, the young man leaves with a small black notebook. After that visit, the staff notices a shift. Yaponchik begins closing drawers, locking cabinets, tucking letters into envelopes and sealing them with wax. No logos, just a symbol, an old Georgian cross, hand-drawn. One envelope is mailed to Miami, another to Brighton Beach. The rest stay in a drawer with a brass handle that squeaks when opened. The house becomes quieter, One afternoon, a low-ranking bureaucrat from a city planning office tries to schedule a meeting, claims he wants input from legacy voices. The request is politely declined. The bureaucrat disappears from his post 2 weeks later. No foul play, just a redirection. Many people still think Yaponchik lost control in his final months, but some say he was more precise than ever. So what do you think? Is it weakness to stop moving, or wisdom to stop reacting? He continues his routines. Tea at 7, reading at 9, chess at 4. By evening, he sits in the courtyard, wrapped in a heavy coat, regardless of weather. He watches the street beyond the fence, not suspiciously, just with curiosity. Once a child kicks a ball over the gate. It rolls to his feet. He bends slowly, picks it up, and sets it gently on the stone wall. No one sees him smile, but the child says later, the man had very quiet hands. In his final journal entry, written with care and a black fountain pen, he writes only this: "I didn't bury the code, I folded it," then underlines it twice. The journal is placed in a locked drawer. No key is found, and the city again begins to hum differently. Late autumn arrives in Moscow, not with a storm, but with a hush. The leaves turn not golden, but brittle. The wind sharper. The city doesn't mourn yet. It senses. Yaponchik, now a fixture behind a lace-draped window, has taken to silence in its purest form. No phone calls, no visits. Even the few remaining staff move like caretakers in a sacred hall. Meals are delivered, not shared. Questions are replaced with nods. The brass bell on his table remains untouched. There's a new presence in the house. Not loud, not announced. Just a man in a wool coat who arrives every morning at 8, leaves at dusk, and speaks only when spoken to. His job is undefined, but the guards know he is the stand-in, the quiet tether to the outer world. And still, even now, ripples continue. One major banker quietly divests his holdings in Sochi. Another reclassifies several shell companies. A former intelligence officer sells his dacha and moves to Vienna. No one says why, but they know. Because even if Yaponchik no longer speaks, his position still echoes. Every so often, a letter arrives, handwritten, no return address, always folded with exact corners. The young man from earlier, sharp eyes, clean posture, collects them, files them, burns some, copies others. Once he reads one silently, then places it in a hollow chessboard and locks it. In the criminal world, the silence has grown disciplined. There are fewer flashy crimes, less chaos, less noise. The younger operators don't understand. They call it a slump. The elders know better. It's respect, because no one makes a move while the architect still breathes. One incident cuts through the quiet. A mid-level figure in the Caucasus, ambitious, reckless, overconfident, declares that Yaponchik's time has passed. Says it in a bar. Twice. He disappears the next week. No violence, no threats, just gone. His cousin finds his apartment empty, his car running, doors open, no keys. Only one thing remains, a watch ticking backward. People stop using his name in jest. In the city center, a new restaurant opens. Italian, minimalist, excellent veal. The owner is unknown, but the staff wear pins shaped like small chess knights. When asked, they just smile and say, "Tradition." On a snowy Thursday, the bell finally rings again, once, then stops. The man in the wool coat appears within minutes. Yaponchik gestures to the window. The snow is falling sideways like ash. He says softly, "It's different now," then adds, "But the code hasn't changed." The man nods. A week later, a document is signed by 3 regional leaders. An initiative for cross-border cultural preservation efforts. It includes protections for cemeteries, old libraries, and former safe houses that never officially existed. It passes unanimously. The man doesn't return the next day. Yaponchik doesn't ask. Instead, he writes another note, this one sealed with wax. The seal isn't a cross this time, it's a pawn. He places it on the table beside the chessboard. That afternoon, he opens the Brothers Karamazov, rereads a single chapter, and underlines one sentence. What is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love. That night, he dreams in Georgian. The guards say they hear him whisper a name, not his own, but a childhood friend's. And then, for the first time in months, he sleeps through the night. Across Moscow, phones ring at unusual hours. Meetings are canceled, accounts are closed, documents disappear from file rooms. It's not panic, it's protocol, because they all feel it now. He's winding down. The next evening, the light in his study remains on past midnight. The bell doesn't ring. The tea goes cold. The clock ticks as usual, but the room feels lighter. Many people still think death arrives with sirens, but some know better. So what do you think? Is it death when the man stops breathing? Or when the last man stops listening? In that house, nothing changes visibly. No cries, no rush, just stillness, as if the building itself is holding its breath, as if Moscow, too, is waiting for confirmation that the page has turned. The official announcement doesn't come from a government, not from a doctor or a family member or a clerk at the city registry. It comes the way all meaningful things do in Yaponchik's world, through gesture. A single white rose appears at the front gate of the compound. No note, no signature, just one flower, laid with surgical precision, stem facing east. The guards see it at dawn, say nothing, remove nothing. By mid-morning, 4 more appear. By dusk, there are 20. By nightfall, the gates are quietly locked and no one is let in. Inside the house, the furniture remains as it was. The chessboard still set, a game in progress with no declared winner. The teacup, still half full. The bell, unmoved. Yaponchik lies in bed, covered with a light wool blanket, hands folded over a worn paperback copy of The Gambler. Spine cracked, several pages dog-eared, his eyes closed, his expression unreadable. A stillness so profound, it feels like someone pressed pause on the air itself. He's gone, and the city adjusts, not with parades or sirens or flags at half-mast, not with televised retrospectives or retrospective documentaries. Moscow grieves Yaponchik the only way it knows how, by becoming quieter. Meetings are postponed, phone calls take longer to dial. That week, no raids are made, no journalists disappear, no verdicts are rushed. It's not fear, it's reverence. His body is handled discreetly. No autopsy, no press leaks. A private van, unmarked, leaves the compound 2 nights later. Only 2 men are inside. Neither speak during the trip. The burial site is unknown, but there are rumors. One says he was cremated, his ashes scattered over the Black Sea. Another claims he was flown back to Tbilisi and buried beside the old schoolhouse. One version insists he was never buried at all, that he simply left, a final vanishing act. But the most compelling version? He's interred beneath the floor of his study, in a space that never appears on blueprints. A hidden chamber, with only a chessboard and an inscription above the stone, built in silence, preserved in silence. Within a week, Brighton Beach holds its own memorial. Not organized, not announced. Just a subtle gathering. Outside the Jewelers Club, 3 candles are lit on the sidewalk. 2 old men stand beside them, coats buttoned, hands behind backs. A woman places a watch on the windowsill. No one touches it. Kazumi in Coral Gables quietly shudders for one night. No explanation. The staff arrive, clean every surface, place a single folded napkin at the corner table, and lock the door behind them. No one tries to reserve that table again. Back in Moscow, the young man, sharp eyes, lean frame, black coat, reappears at the compound. Spends 6 hours alone inside. When he emerges, He carries nothing but a sealed envelope and a single pawn piece carved from onyx. He vanishes soon after. The underworld doesn't name a successor. There's no new dawn, no coronation, because that's not how this works. Yaponchik wasn't a ruler. He was a North Star. The kind of man who doesn't need a title because his absence shapes just as much as his presence once did. Still, small shifts occur. In Georgia, a small foundation is registered under a vague name, the 49th Parallel Trust. Its stated mission is cultural preservation. No address, no website. But within months, it buys 3 properties, funds 2 libraries, and reopens an orphanage that had been shuttered since 1991. In Moscow, an art gallery hosts a single-night exhibit of Soviet-era ink drawings. Unpublicized, free to enter. No artist names listed. But in the back room, under glass, there's a chessboard. Mid-game. The note beside it says, "Final position, unfinished by design." And in Brooklyn, someone carves a tiny symbol into the brick wall behind a sushi bar. Not a name, not initials, just a folded piece of paper, etched in outline, barely noticeable. But those who walk by feel it. Many people still think death is an end, but some know better. So what do you think? Is a man gone when he's buried? Or when we stop adjusting our footsteps around the memory of his shadow? In the months that follow, Moscow learns to breathe without Yaponchik, but not without the echo of his cadence. There's no chaos in his absence, no grab for the crown, no fratricidal violence in dark alleys or garages, just a kind of measured hesitation, like the city is waiting for a ghost to finish its walk before anyone dares speak too loudly again. The vacuum he leaves behind isn't power, it's geometry, because Vyacheslav Ivankov didn't just run an empire. He built architecture, invisible lines of trust, of favor, of shared silence. And now, those lines remain, untouched, unchallenged. In the Ministry of Transport, a familiar memo is quietly withdrawn. In a real estate firm near the Kremlin, a deal is paused mid-signature. The man holding the pen frowns, leans back and says, "Let's wait one more week. Old instincts don't die quickly." The young man, the one who visited Yaponchik in his final months, resurfaces, not publicly. He's seen once at a charity auction, bidding on a set of rare Georgian coins. Once more on a flight manifest to Vienna. Each appearance calculated, sparse, but the ripple effect? Immediate. In Kyiv, a luxury watch showroom quietly changes ownership. In Tel Aviv, an old account, long dormant, suddenly moves funds. Backwards, forwards, then gone. In New York, a Brighton Beach notary stamps a document he doesn't understand, looks up, and sees a shadow walk past his window. He doesn't look again. And in Miami, a woman who once managed the Coral Gables Kazumi gets a letter. No return address, just a typed phrase inside. "You did everything right. Rest now." She moves to Portugal the next week, opens a bakery by the coast, names it the Quiet Table. One day, she notices a man in a coat reading a newspaper by the window. Doesn't order anything, just leaves a folded napkin on the counter. Inside the napkin, a single onyx pawn. It's not just symbolism. The pawn in Yaponchik's world was never the weakest piece. It was the only one that could become anything. But the world doesn't talk in chess metaphors forever. Things continue, slowly. Men adjust. Files are shredded. New networks blossom. A digital front replaces the sushi front. Cryptocurrency begins to hum beneath the old codes. The mechanisms shift from paper to keys. But the structure, the rhythm, remains. Because while Yaponchik has left the board, he programmed the clock. One of his former men, a mid-tier fixer named Alexei, begins running a quiet consulting firm. Corporate clients, Security clearance whispers. He's successful. Wears suits now. But every Tuesday, at precisely 2:00 p.m., he places a call to a number that never answers. Lets it ring once, then hangs up. Every single week. A kind of ritual, because some habits aren't meant to be productive. They're meant to be preservations. At a private estate in Georgia, a wall is built. High, stone, quiet, no nameplate. Just a small metal plate above the gate, weathered and worn. Time tells all truths, but only in silence. People visit, not many, never more than one at a time. They stay no longer than 15 minutes. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they leave small items. Pocket knives, broken watches, coins bent in half. One day, someone leaves a faded copy of The Gambler. Page 73, dog-eared. No inscription. But a dried rose is pressed between the pages. It never wilts. Meanwhile, in the West, someone tries to make a documentary, hires experts, tracks down former associates, gets interviews. But each story contradicts the last. One man says, he never existed. Another says, he lived in my building. A third says, he was my brother. The project never airs. The director now makes nature films, specializes in fog. Because the thing about Yaponchik is that he never cared about being known. He cared about not being misunderstood. He didn't write his name in stone. He wrote it in rhythm, in the way doors opened slightly slower after his arrest, in the way men poured their drinks just below the rim, in the way phone calls paused an extra second before speaking. You can still hear it, if you know what to listen for. Many people still think his story ended with his death, but others understand the deeper logic. So what do you think? Can a man be gone if he's still calibrating the steps of people who never met him? In the end, his legacy isn't the crimes or the code. It's the quiet, and the way it still shapes the air in rooms where no one mentions his name. Brighton Beach continues, as it always has, stubbornly unspectacular on the surface. The trains still screech overhead. The storefront signs still juggle between Russian and English, offering pierogi next to prepaid SIM cards. And beneath it all, the beat of Yaponchik's memory hums in undertones, like a violin that keeps playing after the orchestra's packed up. People don't talk about him now, not directly. They talk around him. They say things like, he'd have handled this differently, or this wouldn't have happened back then. And always the phrase, back then. A cafe on Neptune Avenue adds a new item to its menu. It's called The Architect, a dark tea blend served in a low ceramic cup. No milk, no lemon. The description on the menu simply reads, best served quiet. No one explains the name. No one has to. In Brooklyn, the old Jewelers Club storefront still stands. The glass is clean. The door stays locked. But the interior? Unchanged. Dusty shelves, empty velvet trays. A chessboard on the back counter, still set mid-game. The last piece moved was a knight. Some say the landlord refuses to lease it again out of respect. Others claim it's still being paid for by a trust, through a firm, from a bank no one's allowed to audit. Whatever the truth, it remains untouched. A kind of relic. One night, 2 teenagers try to break in, not out of malice, just curiosity. They manage to pry the window open, step inside, and stand silent in the darkness. The alarm never sounds, but one of them swears they heard a click. Like a clock winding backward. They leave immediately. Outside, they find a folded napkin on their car hood. Nothing inside, just the fold, creased once, perfectly. They tell no one. Meanwhile, in Miami, the final Kazumi location is sold, not closed, sold, quietly. The new owner keeps the name, changes the menu, but preserves the layout. The same table in the back corner, still blocked off, still set every night, with a clean teacup and no chair. Local lore says a man once reserved that table for a decade without ever showing up. Paid in cash, always on time. The reservation is now permanent. The new staff don't know why. They just comply. The young man, the courier turned caretaker, begins to surface more frequently now. He walks the old routes, talks to no one, places calls that ring once, leaves slips of paper and books at second-hand stores. Each paper bears a phrase in Georgian. Translated, they mean, there is no air, only tempo. In Moscow, the Ministry of Culture releases a curious grant for urban folklore preservation. The proposal is generic: oral histories, neighborhood memory, the preservation of immigrant voices. But the fund is large, too large, and no one applies, except one, a non-profit based in Tbilisi. No public office, no phone, just a P.O. box. The project title? The Gentleman Who Spoke in Chess. Within 6 months, the non-profit acquires property rights to 2 buildings in Moscow, 1 in Odessa, and a small island off the Turkish coast. No renovations are made, but guards begin patrolling the grounds. The only shared feature among them? Each has a single pawn etched into the stone near the entrance. No press release ever connects these purchases, but those who notice, notice. In the criminal world, the vacuum remains filled only by discretion. There is no new Yaponchik, because to claim the mantle would be to misunderstand it. He didn't wear power like a suit. He wore it like an atmosphere. Now, in boardrooms and back rooms alike, people still pause before signing, still listen an extra second before speaking, still fold documents inward instead of outward. That is the mark he left, a cultural fingerprint, not of crime, but of calibration. Many people still think he was the last of a dying order, but others wonder if he was something else, the template for what comes next. So, what do you think? Is legacy a footprint, or the silence that follows each step? Somewhere, in a dark room filled with ledgers and linen, a chessboard waits, not for a new player, but for another move, one that doesn't need hands, just memory. Across the Atlantic, in cities that once merely whispered his name, something curious begins to happen. Alignment, not with flags, not with titles, but with rhythm. In Antwerp, a diamond dealer starts closing his shop precisely at 5:47 p.m. every day, even when buyers plead for one more look. In Istanbul, a former smuggler opens a tea room with no signage and only one table. In Marseille, a dock worker tells a newcomer, "We don't do things fast here, we do them right." Ask anyone who remembers the old man. No one says his name, but they tune themselves to the echo. Back in Moscow, there's a small square near Chistya Prudi. Tucked between a noodle shop and a bookstall is a bench that never has gum under it, never gets graffitied, and never, ever gets sat on by 2 people at once. Everyone knows it. They call it the thinking bench. No one claims why, but once an elderly florist left a single folded napkin on it. The wind didn't move it, because the city doesn't move things that were left correctly. Meanwhile, a peculiar trend begins among a new generation of cybercriminals in Eastern Europe. They form a closed collective. No tags, no screen names. They call themselves Shaggy, steps. They don't compete for attention. They don't brag. They operate silently, ethically, by their own code, and with a reverence for invisible boundaries. Their logo, a chess pawn, backlit by a minimalist waveform. When asked by a journalist, via anonymous message, if they're inspired by Yaponchik, they reply with a single sentence. We don't build in his image, we build in his absence, and the silence that follows becomes part of the answer. In Brighton Beach, an old bakery hangs a framed photograph behind the counter. Sepia-toned, slightly out of focus. It shows a table set for one. No face visible. Just hands, resting beside a teacup. Customers don't ask about it, but every Sunday, one man comes in, orders a rye roll and black tea, and sits beneath it for exactly 28 minutes. Rain or shine. One day, a young boy asks him why. The man says, "Because someone once waited here before the world caught up." No one questions it again. Back in Tbilisi, a music school reopens. Its funding? Anonymous. The curriculum includes classical composition, folk instruments, and, curiously, an elective called strategic listening. The instructor teaches not just music, but pauses, space, restraint. In the first lesson, he tells the students, don't rush the note. Let the silence arrive first. It's not about music, not really. Elsewhere, someone begins collecting analog watches, not to sell, just to preserve. Each piece comes from a city once touched by the structure. Berlin, Warsaw, Vienna, Odessa, Miami. Each watch is set to a different time. None tick, until one day they do, at once, for 60 seconds. No one can explain why. Many people still think Yaponchik was a remnant of a vanished world. But others suspect he became a seed, an architecture embedded in human behavior. So what do you think? Is a life's work judged by its noise, or by how well it teaches silence? In a distant office, location redacted, a man in a suit carefully refolds a memo. No names, no numbers. Just a quote handwritten in clean Cyrillic. When the pawn pauses, the game learns to wait. He places the note in a drawer, closes it, and turns off the light. The weather shifts across Eastern Europe. Not meteorologically, but culturally. People don't notice it at first. They just start speaking softer in certain spaces. Start keeping their phones off the table in cafes. Start using old-fashioned courtesies in new places. A small nod, a pause before stepping into a room, a folded napkin placed just so. It's not nostalgia, it's muscle memory, because even if they never met Yaponchik, they've absorbed his rhythm. Through fathers who stopped answering questions a beat too late. Through uncles who placed their wallets down carefully, edge aligned with the table. Through stories told by neighbors about men who never raised their voices, but got things done. In Sofia, a boutique hotel room is always kept vacant. The reason? Unknown. The front desk simply says, "It's reserved. Room 301. No reservations allowed. No guests ever check out of it, because no one checks in." But every week, housekeeping enters, wipes down the chessboard on the desk, and sets 2 pawns in the center, white facing white. In Warsaw, a jazz bar reopens after a 20-year closure. The pianist plays in the back, behind a curtain. Never seen, never named. His set list includes 1 song not listed. No melody, no name. Just a slow progression of notes and spaces. Locals call it the Ivankov lullaby. No one claps when it ends. They just breathe out. On the internet, a new forum quietly appears on the darknet. Its members? Unverified. No user avatars. Just coordinates and timestamps. No one claims ownership. No advertisements. Every post begins with a location and ends with a question. One recent entry reads, "Odessa Pier 422 wow. Who will keep the tempo now?" No one replies, but the thread stays pinned. In Russia, an aging prosecutor finds a sealed envelope in the lining of an old briefcase. He hadn't opened it in decades. Inside is a page from a newspaper, folded precisely. A section about a chess tournament. One player's name is underlined in red. The player lost in the second round. But beside the name, written in clean ink, even the quiet ones move. The prosecutor retires that month. He tells no one why, and in a small town in western Ukraine, a library receives an anonymous donation. Inside the package, a set of rare books, a chess set carved from olive wood, and a small cloth-bound journal titled "To Fold Without Breaking." The opening page reads, "This isn't a code, it's a method." The journal is placed behind glass. Visitors come from all over, sit in front of the case, and simply stare. They never read it. They just sit, sometimes for hours. Back in Moscow, the square near Chisty Prudy changes again. A new bench is added. Same style, same position, but this one faces east. Across the path, no plaque. Just a tiny onyx pawn screwed into the leg. Locals call the two benches the dialogue. They say if you sit at one and speak softly, someone will respond from the other. No one has ever been seen doing so, but sometimes the wind answers. Many people still think Vyacheslav Ivankov was a contradiction. Brutal, yet poetic. Strategic, yet humane. But others believe he was not a contradiction. Just a man who saw that the most dangerous force isn't violence or wealth, but timing. So what do you think? Can a man remain alive not in stories, but in the spaces between them? In the silence between two benches, in the pause before the pawn moves, in the weight of a napkin no longer holding anything, yet never discarded. Far from Moscow's frost-kissed streets and Brighton Beach's slush-lined curbs, in a sunlit apartment in Lisbon, an old woman waters her window plants at 7 a.m. sharp. She hums softly, the same song every morning, a Russian lullaby, barely remembered but never forgotten. On her shelf is a single photo, unframed. A man's hand resting on a chess table. No face, just the suggestion of stillness. She doesn't speak of him, but every Friday she bakes 2 rye loaves and leaves one on her doorstep. By morning, it's gone. No crumbs, just a folded paper beneath the pan, blank. In Tokyo, a businessman closes his laptop mid-conference, stands and bows. No one understands why. The room goes quiet. He says, "Apologies. The time has changed." He never elaborates. 2 weeks later, his division restructures itself completely. The changes? Small, elegant, like a new suit that fits better without looking different. In Tel Aviv, a retired money handler opens a modest bookstore. No signage, no cash register, all sales by donation. When asked if he ever worked in that old world, he says only, "I once handled documents for someone who never raised his voice but changed rooms without entering them." No one presses further. In Vienna, a university lecture is interrupted by a question. "Can criminal legacy function as cultural inheritance?" The professor smiles. Then, with quiet certainty, answers, "Only if the man who left it knew the difference between a name and a method." Back in Georgia, the estate once suspected to house Yaponchik's remains is declared a protected cultural site. The official record says it's for architectural merit. The locals know better. They bring offerings, not flowers or candles, but objects arranged with symmetry. A watch aligned north, a sugar cube placed beside a torn book, a single black bishop chess piece with no set. Guards watch silently, but never interfere. At dusk, the estate's caretaker, a man who never says his name, walks the perimeter. Sometimes he stops beneath the balcony and looks up, as if waiting for someone to step out, lean on the railing and whisper, "Move the night." But no one ever does, and yet he still listens. In Berlin, an art exhibit titled "Echoes of the Unspoken" opens for 1 week only. It features no artist names, no titles, and no explanations. One installation, a dark room with a single overhead light on a chessboard set mid-game. Visitors walk in, look, and leave without speaking. On the final day, A small crowd gathers outside the gallery. The door never opens. The next morning, a white rose is found pinned to the door, stem up, and in an alleyway in Paris, a wall once tagged with graffiti is painted clean. No colors, no signatures, just a stencil in grayscale of a folded napkin, centered, untouched. The city fines the property owner. He pays, then paints a frame around it, calls it pliage en silence, folded in silence. A new cafe opens nearby, with a back table left permanently reserved. Staff are instructed never to clean it, only to dust lightly. It's always set for one. Black tea, ceramic cup, no spoon. No one sits. Many people still believe that power disappears when the man does. But others, those who learned to look beyond noise, understand that real power is encoded in tempo, in method, in how people adjust long after the hand guiding them is gone. So what do you think? Can one man, without fanfare, change the way generations set a table? Yaponchik never asked to be remembered, but he taught them how to remember without words, without monuments, just rhythm. At the edge of the Black Sea, near a quiet Georgian inlet where waves meet stone with unhurried grace, there's a pier that locals call the Whispering Dock. No signs point to it. You have to know how to get there. Past the orchard, down a gravel path, through a crooked gate. Every Sunday at dawn, a man with silver in his beard and a coat 2 sizes too big stands at the edge of that dock. He tosses something small into the water, never looks down, just waits until it sinks. Some say it's a chess piece. Others say it's a stone carved with initials. He never tells. One morning, a child follows him, curious. As the man turns to leave, the boy asks, "Why do you do that?" The old man pauses, considers, then answers softly, "Because ghosts deserve cadence too." Back in Moscow, one of the oldest private banks undergoes a renovation. While gutting a wall, workers find a small sealed envelope between 2 bricks. Inside, a pawn carved from mother of pearl. No inscription, no paperwork. The bank's CEO demands silence. A new vault wing opens that year, but one chamber is left unassigned. The only item placed inside? A single chair facing a mirrored wall. On the mirror, etched in faint lettering, "Fold first, ask later." Security staff never enter, not out of fear, out of form. In Chicago, a jazz club named Midnight Fold gains quiet fame. It doesn't advertise, no website. But on Fridays, the pianist, always unnamed, plays one improvised song each set with exactly 49 notes. No more, no less. The regulars count them without realizing. In Brooklyn, the bakery beneath the unframed photograph finally changes owners. A young woman buys it. 3rd-generation Russian-American. She keeps the decor, keeps the silence, but she adds one item to the menu: Pond's Tart. Crisp, bitter, elegant. The description reads, "Unfinished recipe, make it your own." Somehow that feels appropriate. The boy who once asked about the Sunday loaves in Lisbon grows up, studies architecture. His final project is titled Silent Geometry. It's a layout for a museum with no exhibits, only corners, shadows, and benches placed across from each other. The school calls it impractical. One professor calls it genius. Not everyone deserves a statue, she tells the board. Some men are the pause in the sentence. Elsewhere, in a small cafe in Belgrade, a stranger leaves a folded napkin with the phrase handwritten in ink. Legacy is what doesn't need an audience. The barista hangs it behind the register. No one ever steals it. Back in the digital ether, the Steps Collective begins dismantling itself. Not with drama, not with noise. One by one, accounts vanish. No trace. Their final post reads, "The pawn can retire without promotion." A new collective forms months later. Completely different tools, entirely different structure. But those who look closely find a familiar rhythm. Staggered timing, respectful silence, folded exits. They call themselves Black Tempo, and they never confirm what came before. Many people still think legacy belongs to names carved in granite or yelled from podiums. But others know the truest legacy is written in margins, in a quiet that rewrites behavior. So what do you think? Can a ghost outlive a dynasty? Can rhythm outlast empire? Can a folded napkin do what a crown never could? Somewhere in the archives of an abandoned hotel in Odessa, a room key is found in a drawer, still attached to a faded tag. Room 49. The key no longer fits any door, but no one dares throw it away. The seasons shift in Moscow with their usual gray determination. Snow that forgets to sparkle. Wind that hums in alleyways like an old drunk trying to remember a tune. But this year, something is different. Not louder, not brighter, just more measured. At a small coffee kiosk beside the Yaoza River, an old man sets 2 cups every morning. One for himself, one for a second that never gets picked up. Same order, same placement. Every day. For 12 years, no one ever asks. Until one day a child stops, looks up and says, "Is that for someone who's late?" The old man smiles, soft and worn. "No, it's for someone who arrived before the rest of us." Back in Tbilisi, the estate once cloaked in rumor now hosts a single, yearly event. A gathering of 10 guests, no invitations, no press. They sit beneath the pines in silence. At some point during the evening, a voice, not loud, not commanding, asks, "What have we folded this year?" Each answers in turn, carefully, respectfully. No one interrupts. When the 10th speaks, the group rises, nods, and leaves. No handshakes, just the weight of quiet well distributed. One year, a guest brings a gift, a metronome, vintage, etched with one word, "Continue." The object is placed on the bench and never taken. Back in New York, a lecture at a private university draws attention. Topic: Temporal influence in non-hierarchical criminal structures. The speaker, gray-haired, precise, never names Ivankov directly. But his slides show familiar rhythms, staggered communication chains, untraceable microfavors, patterns of strategic delay. At the end, a student asks, "Was this built intentionally?" The lecturer pauses. It was folded, repeatedly, until it held its shape. Across the Atlantic, a chess grandmaster retires suddenly. In his final interview, when asked who taught him strategy, he replies, "Someone who never played, but taught me how to hold silence on the clock." He doesn't elaborate. In a monastery in Armenia, the head librarian discovers an envelope slipped between 2 15th century manuscripts. Inside, a pawn carved from obsidian, and a single sentence typed in Russian, "Still here, still waiting for the next quiet move." The pawn is placed on the abbey's altar, not consecrated, not labeled, just acknowledged. And beneath a cracked lamp in Brighton Beach, the photograph in the bakery finally fades. The hands, once sharp, now blur. The ceramic cup, however, remains crystal clear. It's the silence people remember after all, not the silhouette. A journalist attempts to publish a final retrospective, a career piece, a closure arc. She travels, interviews, collates. When the story goes to press, the headline reads, "The Ghost Who Folded the World, Unraveling Vyacheslav Ivankov." But before it prints, her editor replaces the title. Folded once, still holding. She doesn't argue, because the deeper you dig into Yaponchik's myth, the more you understand. He never tried to outlive his name. He tried to reduce it to rhythm, to a folding of time and attention, to a lesson whispered between handshakes, to a bench that speaks only when sat upon alone. Many people still think ghosts are stories half finished, but others know the truth. A real ghost is a structure that breathes without being rebuilt. So what do you think? Can a man whose legacy can't be traced still tilt the world in tiny, precise degrees? In one last quiet room in Moscow, a light bulb flickers. Not broken, just resting. The chair faces the window. Outside, the city moves. Just a bit slower than usual. Just enough to make room for one final breath. And inside that breath, the folding continues. And now, let's let the rhythm slow. We've walked through narrow alleys and across oceans. We've watched shadows make moves more meaningful than shouts. And we've followed a ghost who never chased power. Only balance. As your breathing softens and the weight of the blanket starts to settle in, picture a folded napkin, gently placed on a quiet table. No message, no signature. Just an invitation to listen, to the air between words, the stillness between steps. Imagine a street lamp flickering over an empty sidewalk, the hush of a city not asleep, but respectful. Somewhere, a chair remains turned toward a window, always waiting, not for someone to return, but for the world to align again. Just right. You're safe here. The moves have already been made. The board doesn't need your next play, just your stillness. And as the night deepens, remember, not all legacies are loud. Some of them, like Yaponchik's, are folded carefully into time itself. So rest now. Let the silence do the remembering for you.